Hello everybody, how you doing? Now today we've got a review of The Letter, a horror visual novel. This review was written by the lovely Katie Pajamas. Please go follow her on Twitter with the link in the description. These are her words, not mine. Let's see what she thinks of this horror visual novel. Ever since I can remember, I have had a love of all things horror related. Horror games, books, movies, you name it, I was interested in it. In general, I just love being scared. So when I saw there was going to be another horror visual novel brought over to the Switch, I was excited to explore a new entry into the genre that would give me the chills that I enjoy. Would it join the ranks of the Spirit Hunter series and make me feel both unsettled and creeped out? Or would it fall into a different frame and leave me not necessarily scared but more confused, like in House of Fata Morgana? There's only one way to find out. The Letter, a horror visual novel, was originally developed by the Filipino developer Yang Yang Mobile and was originally released on July 24th, 2017 on both mobile and PC. East Asia Soft swooped in recently, however, and assisted in releasing it not only digitally on the console, but also physically too. And since I can't resist a physical Switch visual novel, I grabbed it immediately. Yes, this physical is exclusive to PlayAsia.com. There's a standard edition and a collector's edition, and if you want to pick it up yourself and support VN Paradise at the same time, then please consider using the links in the description. That's where you'll find it, and don't hang about because it may sell out. The game itself would be more unassuming if it wasn't called and defined as literally a horror visual novel in its title, but even then, the cover gives you a small taste of what you might expect. One thing to mention as well is that this is definitely one of those long haul VNs if you're wanting to go for 100% full completion with all the game's endings, CGs, etc. For me personally, I ended at around 52 hours total playtime to clean everything up, since there is a lot of replaying that needs to happen to fully complete all the game has to offer. Additionally, I would highly recommend exploring the content warnings provided by the developers prior to playing the game. There's a lot of things that might surprise you while playing, such as racial slurs, suicide, graphic violence, amongst other things that may make some of you feel uncomfortable. Our story starts off with Isabella, a Filipino real estate agent located in the UK, who is working with a fellow colleague, Rose, in order to sell a famous mansion called Ermengarde. Stories have surrounded the mansion for decades, and there is a local stigma of it being haunted and just plain creepy, but Isabella is determined to make a sale and get her commission. While exploring the mansion and looking for her co-worker, she stumbles into the mansion's attic and has her first run-in with what might be causing all that local fear. She finds a terrifying letter, hence the game's title, written in blood that says, "Help me," repeatedly all over it, with a small tagline at the bottom that says, "Pass it along to 5 people or else." Just like those chain letters you used to get in your email inbox. We also get the first glimpse of a mysterious woman covered in blood, but she's gone almost as soon as you try to figure out what's going on, and needless to say, after this encounter is when the game starts to take a turn into the horror aspects of the story. You're then introduced to the other characters one by one, although you may not realize who they are right off the bat. There's the future purchasers of the mansion itself, Luke and Hannah Wright, along with their interior designer, Marianne. There's also Isabella's small but mostly close group of friends, Ashton, Zachary, and Rebecca. From here, a story unfolds that is divided up into 7 different chapters, each focused on a different character story and told from their point of view, as well as an epilogue showcasing the ultimate endings of the character after the last chapter finishes. These chapters do often intersect and interact with each other and get progressively longer as the game goes on. The first initial chapter can be completed quickly for the most part, whereas the last chapter, depending on the choices you make throughout the game, can take quite a bit longer. One of the more unique parts of the game is seeing how much the earlier choices can affect the routes as you go for all the different endings. Some variances being large new portions of dialogue and cutscenes, and others just being a word or two changed in a sentence. You can actually see all these different routes and changes in quite possibly one of the most complicated looking route overviews I've ever seen in a game since, you know, A Girl Who Chants Love at the Bound of This World. Additionally, the game has a journal you can review that keeps a detailed timeline on the route's story in case you lose track of what's taken place so far. It really shows just how much choice influences the game and how many different endings that it can lead you towards. And let me tell you, there are a lot of endings in this game. Each character has one or multiple good, bad, true, and romantic endings, all of which are determined as you play along. You'll never feel as much pressure while making a choice during the dialogue tree as you do when you're trying to find out if answering this versus that will cause your character to be killed or let them continue on alive and well through the rest of the story. The pressure is only enhanced by the lack of easy chapter select. There's no way to quickly return to the choices outside of making a manual save, and for a game as long as this one, chapter select would have definitely been a welcome addition. Outside of just making decisions, you'll also run into several of everyone's favorite game mechanics, quick time events, or QTEs for short. While I'm not a huge fan of QTEs, I appreciate their addition to this game for two reasons. One, while some are frustrating and unfair, they do add a different element to the gameplay, which I can always get behind. Two, you can choose to turn them off permanently through the menu option as well as skip them as soon as they appear. And to the game's credit, one or two of them, particularly one involving an elevator, gave me a lot of anxiety for the simple fact that it was genuinely scary as shit. When it comes to the characters, there's a nice variety to the main cast. You have your normal likable and unlikable people as well, and are given a good insight into each of their personalities and backgrounds during their individual chapters. I grew to like several of the characters more as a result of this. That being said, they do still have their flaws. Some of the characters come off as a bit childish and cringy. There is a particular romance subplot that involves three of the characters that one of the characters puts way more thought and effort into than any of the other people involved, and it makes her come across as immature and slightly obnoxious, thus putting me off the character for pretty much the whole game. As far as cringe goes, there is a lot of dialogue that comes about as a result of not necessarily poorly written characters, but almost as if the characters were written as caricatures of a portrayal of someone seen in a movie. You know, dialogue you'd only hear in a really bad Netflix movie that no real person in the world would ever actually say. Something like that. One particular character is portrayed to be Irish, and her constant use of the old Irish dialect and references, while historically fascinating, just doesn't strike me as something that normally appears in casual conversation. There's also one instance where a rather large racial slur is randomly dropped into the middle of a sentence, and it took me so off guard that I had to pause and refer to the game's backlog to make sure I'd heard it right. It also doesn't help that after this particular word is used, none of the characters in the scene really react to its use and pretty much just continue the conversation as normal. Although later it is slightly explained as to why the character used this word, it is by no means justifies its use in the game in my opinion. It should have just been left out instead of inserted for a random shock value drop. Now, I can't talk about the characters without also mentioning a big piece of the game, which is the accents. While not egregiously bad, I would say they rather fall into the category of distractingly bad. Some of the characters are meant to have a particular regional accent ranging from British, Scottish, Irish to one character who is meant to be from the Philippines that has no accent to speak of. To put it frankly, the accents are not done well and are nothing to praise the game for. From the research I did, all of the voice cast except for one person were either from the United States or Canada, and for those characters that are meant to have an American accent, this serves them well, but for those that aren't, the results are, well, not great. From the characters mispronouncing regional dialects to sometimes slipping back into their native accent halfway through a sentence, and using words that would nowhere be used in the British language, it takes away from the game that could have been handled a lot better. Moving along to the music and art, these are the pieces I think are done very well in this game. A horror experience is all about the atmosphere through the music, the backgrounds, the art, the story, and this game uses the visual novel side to its advantage by creating some of the creepiest and most disturbing art I've seen in a horror VN of its kind. I'd say it's right up there with the Spirit Hunter series in terms of images that will stick with you. There is one particular CG that pops up from a character's death that was so graphic it nearly made me vomit, and that's only one of the many examples. Another nice touch is that every character during dialogue and every CG has some piece of small animation to it instead of remaining static, which gives the game a little bit more life, even as focused as it is on death. Both the characters and CGs are designed perfectly for the game and create an overall sense of unease when they mean to. Speaking of character designs, outside the normal looking characters that make up the main cast, something I did notice was that the main Spectre, Ghost, antagonist thing does bear a striking resemblance to your typical long dressed, long black haired type of ghost, which makes sense when you look at the media that inspired the game, like Ju-on and The Ring. but that doesn't make her any less terrifying. The way she jitters in the animated CGs and the audio they play anytime she's in the screen will make your hair stand on end. The music also does nothing to settle your nerves. When it plays in the background, even the happier sounding songs will still give you that general feeling of when is the ghost going to pop up next, making every scene have a bit of an edge to it. The game seems fairly polished, but there are a couple of minor things I would adjust outside of this what I've already mentioned. There are occasional audio glitches where some characters' lines aren't voiced for whatever reason. I ran across this more than a few times during my playthrough, and even going back to the backlog to attempt to play the audio results in nothing playing back, leading me to believe that her lines were never voice recorded to begin with, or they edited the script after the voice acting was finished. Also, the user interface isn't as sleek as I would like it, with larger pieces of dialogue running a bit to the side of the window at times. Lastly, there are some grammatical errors here and there that luckily didn't change the meaning of anything but do stand out while you're reading. As a whole, the letter is one of those experiences that has both highs and lows. The horror aspect of the game is memorable and is something that the game should absolutely be praised for. It keeps you engaged throughout the story and gives you a sense of urgency to figure out what is going on in the mansion and why all this horrible stuff is happening to what appears to be mostly a normal group of people. Cringy dialogue and accents aside, the characters have their own stories and the different chapters do a good job of showcasing each of them, although I do wish we got slightly more time with a few of the earlier featured characters. The length of the game definitely diminishes a lot of the feelings of terror that you may have if you plan to go through more than one playthrough to see all the endings and character routes. You can only be scared by a hand grabbing you in a cutscene from underneath a dresser so many times before the shock wears off during your third or so run through. Because of this, I would say know what experience you want prior to jumping in, since it is a rather large time intensive game depending on how you play. I would personally suggest doing one blind playthrough to see the results of your own choices, and then look for a guide for the true ending if you would like to see how the story is meant to tie together. Even then, with as much as this game has to offer, it is hard not to recommend looking into the other endings and epilogues with as many choices as they are. There's a lot you can miss depending on which path you take, especially when it comes to the scary stuff. This is an easily recommendable game to those who love both visual novels and good horror stories. And while the true ending does feel like a little unresolved, and I would like to see a little bit more of it, I didn't feel unsatisfied after I wrapped it up. A 7.5 out of 10. Alright, many thanks to Katie Pajamas for writing this review and spending all 50 hours with it. What a trooper. And yeah, go check out some of her other stuff. She's written quite a few videos for us. And if you want to pick this up physically on the Nintendo Switch, then consider using the links below in the description. There are some standard editions coming back in stock very soon, and some limited editions which will probably sell out very soon. So don't hang about with those if you want the soundtrack CD, which looks fantastic by the way. And yeah, alright, take care guys. Thank you ever so much for watching.